Right, good evening everybody. I'm really excited today to welcome Tom Battey to Harlaxton. Now Tom is a games designer in residence at Sheffield, Hallam University. And I'm not really entirely sure what that means, but I'm hoping that by the end of today, we will know what that means. Is that mic a little bit echoey? Is that okay for you guys at the back? Okay. So, I was under the misapprehension that games design was probably a little bit geeky, a little bit people sat at keyboards and stuff. But actually, what you need to be a really good games designer is to be able to tell a story. And that's not surprising then that Tom's background is actually in creative writing. So, all of you guys out there who are creative writers, you could get into computer gaming too. Anyway, I'm going to let Tom talk about what he does because he'll talk about what he does far better than I will. And we'll take some questions at the end.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This place is a lot fancier than where I normally teach, so this is cool. So I'm Tom. I teach at Sheffield Hallam University as well as do some of my own design work. And today I'm going to give you a brief run through of the history of the UK video game industry, which is quite different to the history of the US video game industry, so I'll sort of talk you through that. The subtitle for the talk is The Rise, the Fall and the Rise Again, because that's very much what happens to the UK video game industry, specifically between like 1980 and today. So a little bit about me, as Nicola mentioned, I started off in creative writing, so I'm a narrative designer. I do kind of the story design and storytelling elements of various games. And I'm currently the game designer in residence at Sheffield Hallam University, which is not too far from here. It took me about an hour on the train, I think. So what that means is that I teach into all levels of our game courses, but I also do my own design and research and make small games and prototypes as part of my job there, focusing mainly around interactive characters. That's my research specialism. So I'm not going to talk too much about my stuff today. I'm going to take a bit of a broader look at games in general in the UK. But just me personally, I've done mostly weird little arty or academic projects no one will have ever heard of, but I've worked with various clients. I've worked with the British Library before, down in London. I've worked with the BBC on a storytelling project, so I sort of worked independently on games for about 5 years before I got into academia and started teaching on a full-time basis. So I guess I'll probably start by trying to read the room. Who here plays video games? Even semi-regularly? Okay, good, so I'm not going in totally blank, otherwise this might be a little bit difficult. Does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what the most successful UK-made game to date is? Nope, it's actually Grand Theft Auto 5. You'd be mistaken for thinking that's an American game. I think I probably thought it was for a while too. But it's actually made in Edinburgh, in Scotland. That's where Rockstar North, which is the subsidiary of Rockstar that make the Grand Theft Auto games, they're actually based in Edinburgh. I was there on holiday recently and they had a big Red Dead Redemption 2 sign plastered up on their office. And yeah, so Grand Theft Auto 5, made in Scotland, and it's now the highest grossing piece of media in history. So bigger than any Hollywood film, bigger than any like platinum selling music album. I think it's on 90 million sales and $6 billion in revenue, and still climbing because people are still playing that to this day. You may have played it. And yeah, that was made up there in Scotland, not in a massive studio in America somewhere. So yeah, Rockstar North, again, they've made all of the mainline Grand Theft Auto games for those that know them, and also things like Red Dead Redemption. Their most recent game is Red Dead Redemption 2, if anybody knows that one. But yeah, started off as a really small startup up in Edinburgh in the early 90s. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got from kind of no video game industry in Britain, around about 1980, to building the biggest selling piece of media that there's ever been in Scotland. So where did it all begin? Not on anything that looks at all like a modern games console or modern PC. In fact, a lot of the success of the early UK games industry could be laid at the feet of this guy. This is Sir Clive Sinclair. And he was responsible for introducing these bits of kit in 1980 and 1981. That's a Sinclair Zx 80 and a Sinclair Zx 81. I now realise I haven't written 81 after it, but it says it on the box, so hopefully you get the message. And this was kind of, this was revolutionary, like 1980s Britain, mainly because they were so cheap. That's £100 in 1980s money, which is probably about 400 quid today. But back then, sort of turn of the 1980s, the only real computers you could get were several £1,000s worth of big mainframe stuff. There weren't many computers around at all at that point in time. I mean, Sinclair was very much about making computing available to the masses, to be something people could just buy off the store shelves, because it really wasn't up until that point. So these two bits of kit came out in rapid succession, and you could plug them into a television and you could code your own games on them. Very, very basic games. So I'm not going to get into sort of technical details, but they are not very fast by modern computing standards. So both of those boxes came out and they had 1 kilobyte of RAM. Now again, because we're not all computer scientists, I'm going to try and show you what 1 kilobyte of RAM looks like. So a PlayStation 4, which is kind of your video game console of now, that's like the original model, came out in 2013. That has 8 million kilobytes of RAM. So a PlayStation 4 is 8 million times faster than 1980s ZX 8081. The original iPhone, so the 2007 one, that's 128,000 kilobytes. 128,000 times faster. That's like the old iPhone. Don't know about an iPhone 11, that's a lot quicker. The original iPhone, a lot quicker. Original Nintendo DS, like the prehistoric clamshell one, 4,000 times faster than what you could buy on a shelf in 1980. The original Game Boy, so like the black and white one that was kind of, it's a chunky brick. So this is probably dating me. This was my first video game thing. I had a Game Boy when I was about 8. Yeah, big black and white thing. That was 8 times faster than a whole home computer was in 1980 in Britain. And then, just as an experiment, I just made an empty Word file on my computer to go, okay, how big is this? With no words on that, that's just a Word file that I opened, saved, checked how big it was. So literally just displaying a blank page and a Word logo requires 12 times as much memory as people were building video games with in 1980, 1981. So it's sort of worth putting that into context in like what the cultural space was like in the UK around 1980. So arcade machines were taking off. We had the big arcade machines, mostly from America and Japan. They were becoming really popular. So your classic arcade games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders. So there was kind of a game scene still, but it was mostly focused in arcades. At this point, most people had a colour television. Like 96% of the UK had colour TV, but at the start of the 80s, Britain still only had 3 TV channels. So we're a ways off now. If you didn't like one of the 3 things that was on at any given time, you probably and then the computers that were around at the time, you could buy household PCs, mostly the chunky IBM ones, but they all cost upwards of like £1,000, which if you translate that to today's money, that's like paying £4,000 for a computer. Most households couldn't afford that, particularly if they were all doing with a computer in 1980. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have in the industry of computer science, you probably didn't own a PC at this point. And there were very early particularly popular in the late 70s. They didn't take off in the UK as much as they did in America. And in the early 80s, they kind of died out due to just a huge glut of software. There were lots of games that were made for them that were really bad. I'm not going to go into it now, but look up the ET cartridges that were buried in a desert. There's this story that it's notoriously regarded as the worst game of all time. The tie-in game for the film ET, for the Atari 2600. They produced thousands of these cartridges. Nobody wanted it, it was awful. And they then buried it in the desert. And recently they dug them back up again to prove that it's not just an urban legend. There's a whole documentary that I recommend checking out. So that's a whole piece of history. But that kind of passed us by in the UK a bit. By the time Sinclair was introducing his machines, the Atari was kind of on the way out and never really took off to the same degree in the UK here. So that's sort of what we're looking at when these machines were introduced. You've got a populace who knows what games are, like we like playing video games at the arcades. We all have colour televisions that we're quite bored with because we can only watch 3 channels. So what those early machines did was give people an opportunity to make something play on a TV screen. And that was revolutionary. In kind of 1980, the fact that you could plug something into your television and play something that was a bit like an arcade game on it was great. And these machines also let you write your own games on them. They were computers, essentially. So you could just plug them in and code whatever you wanted. So the very earliest games distribution in the UK came out of magazines. So early on, it was just kind of your general electronics magazines, but later there were sort of gaming-specific ones. So that's a very early computer and video games magazine. And CVG, they ran until the mid-2000s. And then in electronic games, but they would literally, in the back of the magazine, they would print all the code you needed for a game. So like if you're going to play a Pong knockoff, there would just be all the lines of code written out over maybe 2 pages. If you wanted to play that game, you'd plug in your ZX81 and you'd type out what was in the magazine. And if you got one of the letters or numbers wrong, it didn't work, so you had to do it again. And so you sort of had this culture of people buying these things and just literally programming the games from a magazine into their new computers. And the games were very basic. Again, 1 kilobyte of RAM, 1/12 of a blank Word file. You couldn't do a lot in terms of graphics here. The earliest ones were black and white only. Most games were things like the letter A moving backwards and forwards and firing dots at the letter W. People were still quite creative with those very basic graphics. So I think the dinosaur in the middle, he's still kind of cool. And he is just made up of like black squares and the letter O for his eyes. So it was really kind of an early programming culture. Anybody that could kind of get their head around this code could kind of make what they want and play it on their televisions. And so you had sort of a lot of like after-school clubs where people would gather around their ZX81s and just code things. And a lot of like the UK industry veterans come from like that scene. People who are older and greyer than I am, but who kind of grew up just sitting in their front rooms coding things directly into their televisions, are the kind of people who are running the big studios these days. So kind of the big one, the one that really took off and made the UK games industry a thing, was the Sinclair Zx Spectrum. So this came out in 1982, and it had 2 models. One that was 16 kilobytes of RAM, so a little bit more than a blank Word file, and one that was 48 kilobytes. So they are, considering that came out the year after, the model that was 1 kilobyte, that's a huge increase in computing power. So you put that on some kind of timeline, the ZX Spectrum and then the Commodore 64, which was the American-made rival to that, they launched around 1982. And they could produce games that looked like that, essentially. So we're working with colour now. We can get actual pixels on the screen. Not everything's made out of like letters and squares anymore. You can do some quite advanced artwork now. So whatever that weird skull thing is in the middle, it's pretty advanced for something made in 1982. And this meant that teams started to form around the games. Up to this point, it would just be like, mostly just kids in their bedroom bashing out Pong clones. But now you can make stuff that starts to look quite sophisticated. It makes sense to have artists on your team as well as programmers, to have maybe 3 or 4 people working on a game at once, maybe someone coding the artwork, someone coding the engine, things like that. So small little studios started to spring up, and they were not really professional. Again, they were mostly just guys in their bedrooms at this stage. But teams started to form around these games, and they started to release games fairly regularly. So a mid-80s development studio might look something like that. That's the Oliver twins, who created Dizzy, which is a game about an egg. It was sort of Britain's version of Sonic in the 80s. I highly doubt anybody's seen it. It's an egg with legs. Eggs were actually popular because they're really easy to make a computer draw. There were quite a few early games characters who were eggs with arms and legs and eyes, and I can only assume that's because it's easy to make an egg move around on a screen. And the reason that this started to take off is because the games were all made on cassette tapes. Probably most people in this room won't remember cassette tapes. I had loads of people used to record music on these. They're like ancient iPods if good man. But the thing is, you could pick these up dirt cheap. You could collect loads of these, so people were starting to share their games. You could like buy these in bulk. They'd be like 10p a go. You get a packet of them like this, and you could then write a game on your Spectrum and then print a bunch of them. You could just code them onto cassettes. You could give them to your mates, trade them around a bit. And people started to do that. People started initially to distribute their games in magazines again. So it started off being like mailing lists. You could write into magazines and ask for whatever games you wanted from there on a list, and people would like post them out. So a lot of postal orders, a lot of like those padded envelopes with cassette tapes posted in, and people were just doing it out of their houses to start off with. They'd have a garage full of cassette tapes. If someone ordered a game from a magazine, they'd print one on the cartridge, pop it in a thing, post it out, and someone would send them like £6 in the post. And then this got so popular that people started to set up local, what were called micro fairs. So sort of gathering communities, again starting off around London but spanning out to the rest of the UK, where people would take boxes full of cartridges of games that they've made, kind of posters that they'd hacked together themselves to stick up, and it'd be like a trade fair. People would be swapping video games. It'd be like a tenner for 3 of these games, and companies would start going to this year by year. And I say companies, they probably still weren't incorporated or anything like that. They're still probably just a team of people making these things after school or something like that, but they're taking them to these trade shows and they're selling them. They're starting to make money doing this. And so the high street caught on, and that's an image of the first actual game shop in the UK. It's called, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Microbyte, and it was in Croydon in London. And it's the first shop that just sold games. The guy that ran it essentially saw that these fairs were popular enough people were coming to them, that he thought, I can start a shop that just sells games. That hadn't been done before. That opened in 1984. And as the first time you could walk into a shop and buy games, and it was super popular. So much so that rivals started to spring up, and again, kind of spreading out from London, these little games shops, little boutique-y things that were, again, largely just selling products that people were bringing in cardboard boxes and unloading out the back of their car. So I've made a bunch of copies of this game, will you stock it in your shop? And I go, yeah, we need stock, we'll see if it sells, and it does. And like, people they're starting to distribute, and they're starting to actually make money from this. Excuse me. So you've probably all been to a WH Smith at some point, probably in a train station or an airport most likely. And they were the first UK major distributor to start stocking video games, and they started back in 1983. So WH Smith didn't look like that in those days, it looked more like that. And it's actually kind of cool. These days you don't associate WH Smith with anything cool. It's mostly places you buy magazines when you've forgotten to bring real entertainment for a plane journey or something. But back in the day it was a place that you'd pick up computer software and things like that. And they started stocking mostly ZX Spectrum and Commodore games. And this was the first time that the people making the games could get their games in front of the general public. So, kind of before that, we're working out fairs or boutiques. You kind of like people needed to be interested in video games to see what they were very much selling to your friends, essentially, in the industry. When WH Smith started taking games orders, now people who were walking in for a magazine or a newspaper could see video games on the shelves and they might buy video games. So a lot of companies started to spring up distributing mainly through Smiths and then other UK retailers picking up there. So this was all happening around 1985, and then there were two other major steps forward in computing, which was the Atari ST and the Amiga 1000, which were again a step up in quality from what people were programming before. These had 16-bit graphics, which was super new and exciting back in the day. Still, probably considerably less powerful than just a basic iPhone. But these were fast machines at the time, and it meant that you now needed a team of people to make games. You could program on one of these by yourself, but you wouldn't make something that was appealing enough to sell. You kind of needed a team of artists to make things that looked good enough. And so distribution and publishing started to take off. Companies started to pop up around these machines, around sort of attracting those kids who were originally just coding things in their bedroom, forming teams, and then actually selling as publishers out to your WH Smiths or your Woolworths or things like that. A lot of you won't remember Woolworths. Woolworths was great when I was a kid, but they are not around anymore, which is a shame. They were one of the other early chains that picked up video games in a big way. And so a lot of small publishers, little UK-owned publishers, started to spring up and release these games. Some of them are still around today, most of them are not. But this was kind of, so this is the late 80s, now, and this was kind of the golden age of the British games industry. You had very cheap media. You could buy either cassette tapes or floppy disks. Now that was complications. Stacks of those when I was younger. Just feed them in one at a time, then stop the game for about 4 hours. Games would be like 10 of those big. But these are things you can pick up for a few pence. And so these little distribution companies just had like tiny warehouses, just stacked games on these very cheap pieces of distribute media. And they would just drive them around the UK, handing them off to WH Smith, whoever, because these kind of big UK distributors didn't know anything about games, they didn't know anything about the games industry at the time. They just knew that games were quite popular and were now making them quite a bit of money. So really, anyone who could stick a company logo on a van could kind of ship games around and sell them into these big stores. And so people were making a lot of money shipping these around. Game stores in places like Smith's were huge. You've got whole corners dedicated to those games on the shelf up there. And so things like, these are all, again, mostly specifically UK-based games. And at this point, these bottles were taking off. The publishers who had a bit of money, who generated quite a bit of money selling games, reach out to companies in America or companies in Japan and get them to ship their games over and publish those games. few guys in the UK with a van could do that very easily. So they were sort of broken in getting games internationally and putting them on our store shelves. And the games industry really kind of grew up around that. And then towards the end, the consoles that you probably actually heard of at this point, your big Japanese consoles first launched in the UK. So the Nintendo Entertainment System came out in 1986. Most people probably know it as the NES. As the first Nintendo home console. The year after the system, they were kind of major competing systems of the late 80s. And they were so popular that you can now buy mini digital versions of them to plug into your TV. Or like these so much that they're still buying versions of them today. Mostly it's kind of a nostalgia thing. But these are like big brands, household names. And they really changed the way games publishing worked, which led to kind of the fall of that homebrew, particularly British games industry scene. So a few major differences that Sega and Nintendo brought about were A, the games were all published on bespoke cartridges. So you couldn't just print loads of these. Nintendo or Sega owned the patent to the actual bit of plastic you put in the machine. So you had to license your games through them. You couldn't just buy loads of floppy disks and sell as many games as you want. You had to tell Sega or Nintendo how many games you expected to sell, and they would stockpile these really expensive plastic cartridges. And then Nintendo introduced the original Nintendo seal of quality, which I don't think they put on their games anymore, but they were doing it up until pretty recently. Do they still do it? I've not bought a physical Nintendo game for such a long time. I download everything on my Switch now. So yeah, in that case, that's still around. And that was kind of an answer to the millions of copies of E.T. buried in the desert problem that the Atari had. There was no quality control on those early games machines. Anyone could publish anything. And that turned out to be a problem, and that's why those early consoles failed. Nintendo's answer to this was that they had to quality approve every game released on their system. So on those earlier consoles, you could literally burn anything onto a cartridge, and if someone wanted to buy it, you could sell it to them, and it would work on their console. With Nintendo, you had to register with Nintendo as a developer. You had to use Nintendo-specific hardware to develop your games. You couldn't just plug something into your television. You had to have what we call development kits to work on, and those were expensive to buy. And then Nintendo, you had to send your game to Nintendo to have it quality approved before you could sell it, before Nintendo would distribute it on their platform. All of that was hugely expensive, particularly if you're a small, local homebrew British company that's used to kind of chucking a bunch of cassette tapes into the back of a van. You needed serious capital to ship on these platforms. And that only became more difficult as the 90s rolled round and we got the Super Nintendo, which was the Nintendo flavour of the 90s, and the Sega Mega Drive, which again were bigger, more powerful machines. The games were more expensive to make, and again we're having to deal with that licensing issue and actually getting stuff out onto that platform. So a lot of those small publishers that had kind of sprung up around that like homebrew, homespun British game scene started to disappear because you needed a lot of money to be able to publish onto these platforms. And by this point, Nintendo and Sega were where all the money was at. There wasn't kind of that British homebrew equivalent to these consoles. Everybody was playing on a Japanese piece of hardware at this point. So a lot of the publishers started to disappear, and a lot of the development talent moved out of the UK to America. So there's sort of a big difference between the UK and the US in how we treated our games industry at this time. America put a lot of money into its game scene. They developed a lot of their own games. There were a lot of government supporting initiatives that would put money into development. They recognized that this was a massive industry that needed support. So the American games industry through this time was constantly really strong. The British government didn't really recognise how good games could be. They didn't see British games development as something that was worth funding. So basically anyone who was any good just moved to America, because that's where the money was, that's where the jobs were. So again, British-only publishers kind of disappeared through the 90s. There were still a few big ones. Ocean was still around, and there were people who were putting things out. Psygnosis was still around until the early 2000s. But at this point, most games publishers and developers came from either America or Japan, because that's where the money was. And a big part of that problem was just how expensive games were to make at this point. So I'm going to use Sony consoles as the example throwing up this section, but feel free to swap in a Nintendo 64 or an Xbox or whatever you'd rather imagine playing in 1994. So the next generation of consoles around 1994, when the PlayStation launched in the UK, was the big push into 3D. 3D graphics were considerably more expensive to make. You needed a lot more people making the games, and you needed a lot more time to make the games as well, which time plus people equals expensive games. So in 1994, around the launch of the original PlayStation and the first sort of big 3D games, the average game's budget was between $400,000 and $1.5 million. Jump forward to when the PlayStation 2 launched in 2000, and you're looking at $3 to $5 million. And this is just development costs per game. This doesn't take into account marketing campaigns or distribution or anything like that, which were increasingly, as games were becoming a big media industry, you really had to compete for eyeballs. You had to have adverts. You had TV campaigns and things like that. The British publishers of the mid-80s were used to just kind of, you put games on a shelf and people buy them because the box art's cool. By the mid-90s, early 2000s, you need to have massive campaigns built around these massively expensive games. And a lot of the smaller British companies just couldn't put up that sort of money to make a game, particularly when you consider like the market costs of then shipping things to America and distributing there. It became very difficult, and that only gets worse as we get closer to now. So PlayStation 3 launched here in 2007. Again, feel free to, it could be an Xbox 360 or Nintendo Wii, slightly different ballpark there. But again, you're looking at an average development cost of between $18 million and $28 million at this point. These are like approaching Hollywood film levels of expensive to make now. You definitely can't sit in your bedroom and code one of these unless you live for about 300 years. So current console generation kicked off around 2013. Budgets now you're looking at between 50 million and 100 million, conservative estimate for what it costs to just develop a video game. So looking back at GTA 5, the most profitable piece of entertainment of all time, developed in Scotland, cost around 200 million to make. And I don't think that is the most expensive video game made to date. There are certainly other games that could compete for that sort of money. So looking at the game space today, 2019, these are kind of your major publishers. These are the majority of the companies that are distributing most of the games. There are other smaller ones in other countries distributing games, but the majority of your big AAA, the kind of games that you'd see advertised on the side of the bus, will have been published by one of these studios. And none of them are British. We don't have a big publishing scene over here. Because again, we didn't get the capital that we needed to be able to build these massive firms. The majority of the big publishers are either American or Japanese, with the exception of Ubisoft, who are French. So in terms of publishing, there isn't really a publishing scene, not on a large scale in the UK anymore. And the development scene shrunk massively as well, with all of these people moving to America or Japan and kind of heading up the companies there, because we produced very good programmers in the 80s, because you kind of had to plug these things into your TV and you had to learn how to code to make anything move. British programmers in the mid-90s were considered really, really good. So they became the heads of studios in a lot of companies in the US, for example. But they didn't set up big video game studios in Britain anymore. But that has changed a bit in the last sort of 15, 20 years. Development in the UK has started up again, not on that kind of massive AAA scale, not as much anyway. But this can largely be charted back to the release of the original iPhone in 2007. So this is a bit of a different timeline for how you might look at games. So the release of the iPhone in 2007 and the release of the Unity 3D engine in 2005, which is a free-to-use that you can download onto PC or Mac, and you can kind of code games on it. And then Unreal Engine 4 again became free to use in 2012. So what this meant was this kind of brought back that kind of bedroom programming scene again. Mobile phone devices that almost everyone has now, and you've got bits of software that let you. It doesn't even have to be a good PC. You can install anything that makes stuff work. People are able. That's what I did. About 5 years, I kind of worked on that. Prototype, and then I just sort of sit on my laptop and sell it. I've been able to do that before, again, maybe about 10 years ago. So where this independent scene is selling their games, they're not selling them on store shelves, because that costs a huge amount of money. But you're looking at distribution platforms like the mobile phone stores, so the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. Steam, which is a distribution store for PCs or Macs or computers generally. And then even the stores on the big console, you can sell games digitally. And the fact that you can sell things digitally now through the actual gaming platform massively cuts down on distribution. Having to have warehouses full of plastic discs anymore, you can just make a game, ship it onto the store. It's a lot closer to how things were in the kind of floppy disks back in the band days. And then we've seen other people getting into the market. So the store came out last year as kind of a competitor to Steam, looking at distribution. Arcade released last week as another service to get games on your iPhone. Small teams get games in front of a lot of people again. And that's new, and that's where a lot of the small independent studios are shipping games out. So a lot of little independent mobile studios started to pop up around the UK. Again, sort of starting off in London, but then spreading out from there. There are vibrant independent game scenes in Brighton, in Manchester, in Edinburgh in Scotland, and in Dundee, based around the university there. And in particular, so this is Old Street Roundabout in London. I now don't know how I ever afforded to do that. But this used to be somewhere you could afford to live. Part of the reason you now come is because a lot of new software, particularly mobile-focused studios popped up around there. A lot of them making small mobile games with small teams of people, maybe like 4 or 5 people are able to make a pretty decent mobile game again. So a lot of these studios popped up. So Old Street Roundabout is kind of, they call it, it's like London Silicon Valley equivalent. It's where all of our tech startups are. Not all of them, obviously, but a bulk of them start off here. and a lot of games studios started to come out of that. So the UK games industry has really picked up again in the last 10 or 15 years. After sort of the early Nintendo period, where it kind of looked like Britain was out of the game scene completely, we've got quite a lot of independent game spirit back. And there are a few other things that have kind of helped the industry get back on its feet in the last few years. So the Livingston Home Report, titled Next Gen, came out in 2011, where basically games industry veterans reviewed the state of selling games in the UK. A bit rubbish for a while, like the UK games weren't even going anywhere, so they kind of got together, got some research and tried to work out why. What is it the UK is not doing that America and Japan are doing to really kind of start our game going? And the major result of that in 2014 was the video game project. To give tax breaks to video game developers in the same way that they fund film studios or theatre companies through tax breaks. It was kind of a landmark moment for UK games because it was the government acknowledging that games are as much of an art form and a valuable piece of media as all these other types of media that were already getting the tax breaks. And it made it much more practical and much more affordable to set up a small game studio in the UK because you can count on break relief, which essentially means you have more money you're not giving to the government that you can spend on making your games. And a lot of studios are using that to spin up studios around the UK. And also, we're moving to people science primary schools again. Now, I don't know how things work in the US, but in the UK, we kind of stopped teaching computer science, particularly at school level in the 90s. Primary school level, definitely. It's not that useful unless you're going to become an accountant. Really recently, that's been what they've been selling as computing in schools. But again, coming out of the schools have started developing software, like looking at making games and things. And again, some of the introduction of these like cheap platforms that you can get into schools and use to teach people have made it really easy for schools to start teaching this. I realise you both laughed because you used to be accountants. I'm not saying that in the sense that I'm not suggesting that accountants are bad at all. I'm saying that you couldn't do an ICT qualification and scientist off the back of it. Probably really useful if you did get into accounting. Not so useful if you want to make video games. I tried. I could make Excel spreadsheets change colour quite well, but that didn't carry through to my professional career somehow. So all of this stuff is giving the UK games industry a real lease of life and getting us back on our feet. So the state of things today are looking a lot more positive than they looked this time 10 years ago. The UK games industry made $5.05 billion in 2018. And that accounts for 51% of all entertainment revenue in the UK. So again, that's like films, music, television, all the other things that are not video games made slightly less than half as much money as video games did in the media sphere. So the games industry is big in the UK in terms of capital. And there are currently, or again, I'm not sure when this figure was accurate from, there may well be more now, 2,280 games studios or games related companies in the UK. So that could be developers, could be publishers, could be marketing outlets, could be employment agencies, things like that, but related specifically to the games industry. And around 86% of the games workers have a university degree. So it's certainly not the case that you have to have a degree to get into games development here. A majority of people do, but a lot of people are getting into games just off the back of, again, stuff they've coded in their bedrooms, or mods they've made for existing games, things like that. But we do have a good games education scene in the UK. I'll talk about my university a bit, partly because I'm not above a bit of self-promotion, but also because it's the only one I can really talk about with any authority. But this is kind of a similar structure you'll see from most universities that are offering games-related courses to students who want to get into development. So at Hallam we teach at bachelor's level, so undergraduate, usually 18 to 21-year-olds, but you can come at any point. We teach game art, game design and development, and computer science. Programmer-minded, whether you're more art and design side of things or somewhere in the middle, you've got a choice to specialise. And then at master's level, we offer master's degrees in game art and game software development. Again, and that'll be a similar setup to most of the UK's good games universities. And I think we are one of the good UK games universities, according to league tables and things like that. I don't have the information, but our courses rate quite highly, and a lot of our students go on to get jobs, which is always nice for us. So yeah, I'll talk through we'll just go quickly through some of the big studios that we have around the UK before I take some of your questions. So Sumo Digital, I think, is the biggest company in the UK developing games. They are right in Sheffield, and they've worked on usually a lot of so their big recent games, Microsoft, Sonic Racing games for Sega. They've worked on Forza games. They've worked on Dead Island. And then Snake Pass, if anyone's played, that's a much smaller game that was kind of their indie projects. They made enough money working on these big American and Japanese IPs that they got to kind of build their own game. And that was really successful to pick that up on Nintendo Switch or all sorts of things, I think, at this point. So Codemasters are kind of the veteran developers of racing games in the UK. We're really good at racing games for some reason in the UK. I think English people just really like cars. But Codemasters have been around since they were actually up on that slide I showed with a very different model. But they started up in the mid-80s and they kept developing and publishing games all the way through to now. So racing games that come out each year. And also the Colin McRae licensed games that became Dirt, so you may have seen Rare, again, very old studio, again they were around in like the mid-80s, and probably most famous for Banjo-Kazooie on the N64 and further. They're now owned by Microsoft, so they publish Xbox exclusive stuff, so again, big American publisher, but pretty small British developer that's making these games. So most recently they released Sea of Thieves for Xbox One and PC, and then they made a lot of Kinect games back when that was a thing, Viva Pinata, which I still think is brilliant, but hardly anyone played, and sequels to Banjo-Kazooie. And then Us 2 Games is that's kind of, they're kind of the, not the biggest example, but my favourite example of the like small mobile independent studio. They're based in London. They make primarily mobile games, so Monument Valley and Monument Valley 2 are those ones, but they've also made some, and they've recently released a game for the Apple. Are you not playing it? I play video games. It's but yeah, Assemble with Cares last week, and I will check it out at some point. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour, hopefully, of the UK games industry from kind kind of where it started, or where at least we started making the games, up until where we stand today. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I will take them now. Equally, if you want to get in touch with me or ask me a more complicated question, feel free to drop me an email or back to my Twitter handle so you can find me through there. Yeah, does anybody have questions? Yes.
In your opinion, what's the most famous game you've ever worked on?
The most famous game I've ever worked on is one you'll not have heard of, but if I skip all the way back through the PowerPoint, there's probably a quicker way of doing this, but I've started now, so I'll keep going. No, yes, that Shakespeare one, you can see up there, that's the game that got me the most press. So that was a collaborative project with the British Library. So the British Library have almost all books through the whole of history, and they kind of opened up their Shakespeare collection for games designers and developers to play around with. So we got all these cool old manuscripts and a lot of things that were related to that, like these original illustrations people had done hundreds of years ago, like Shakespeare plays that I did a really crude job of cutting out and making into little 3D figures. But yeah, I essentially turned a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream into an interactive narrative experience. For those that don't know A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's the one where fairies throw love potions on people and they all fall in love with one another. I see people nodding, obviously done Shakespeare. So yeah, what I did was basically make it so you could walk into a scene of play and indiscriminately chuck love potions around to change how the characters reacted to one another. So you could completely wreck the play by making the character that was supposed to be in love with this character fall out and in love with someone else. So I won an award for that, which was cool. Awards are always nice to put on your CV. I've shown it off at a few exhibitions around the UK. People seem to like it. Under the hood, it's a total mess. The code is awful and it barely hangs together. And I could not make any more of it because if I touch it again, it would break. But its current perfectly encapsulated form did quite well in small independent circuits. And again, you can go on. I'm not going to just do it over here. So yeah, again, nothing anyone's heard of, but that's probably my most well-known game amongst very small literary academic game circles in the UK.
As a Shakespearean scholar, I'm somewhat cheesed off that you're the one that got to go to the British Library and get all the manuscripts out.
They do one every year, not always with Shakespeare, but it's kind of an initiative they have where they get, so I did it while I was a master's student, and they get games designers and software engineers and people who don't normally have anything to do with Shakespeare or historical maps or things like that. They just give you all of this stuff. They don't let you touch it. They have official people with official gloves who stand near the things and they go, which page of this would you like? And you go, well, okay, keep going a bit. I go, okay, I want that one. And they go, right, we'll go and scan this with our official scanners. You do not breathe on it. Don't go near it. But then you get really high resolution scans of these fantastic documents and pieces of artwork that I can then put in Photoshop and chop up and turn into a horrible mess. Yeah, it was really good fun. And they do one of those every year, so it's on a different theme. So once it was maps, mine was Shakespeare. They did an Alice in Wonderland one, which was really cool because a lot of the visuals around Alice in Wonderland are really cool. So you've got a lot of some of the weird and wacky concept art stuff people have done for that through the years. So yeah, it was a really cool thing to work on. Any other questions? Yes?
This is probably really stupid, but I don't. Are there any major trends that you can see in terms of the sort of content of games? You obviously have studios that specialise in certain sorts of things, but in general, are there broad trends that you can see in terms of what people want to play?
Yeah, yes, definitely. And I think like as people in the industry really have to keep on top of the trends. So the current trend in the industry is for a thing called a Battle Royale, which is a big multiplayer game where 100 people drop onto a map and they all fight to be the last person standing. So again, you're kind of doing this on your computer or console, you're not really with other people, but it's that kind of competitive. The one people have heard of is Fortnite. If you've heard anyone mention Fortnite, that's what that is, and that's why that's like the most popular thing at the moment. But yeah, a very definite trend in the industry. So you'll shooting games. That's just what makes a lot of money. So that's what people keep making. And again, like big multiplayer, again, mostly shooting games at the moment are what's popular. But that's kind of very different from what people are building on like small studio scales. So there's a real massive difference in trends for what your like $100, $200 million video games are versus what your little teams in kind of a flat in London are making. A lot of kind of the independent scene is like throwbacks to the early 90s. A lot of video games people are making now in small teams look like they could have come out in 1995, partly because that's what we played and we grew up and we were like, remember how games used to look like this and they were good, I'm just going to make the same thing again. So there's very different trends depending on what scale of budget and how many people you need to sell to. So one of your really, really expensive like shooting games needs to sell 8 million copies to be considered a success. Something about Shakespeare that I made in my bedroom and out the back of my university is an audience of about 20 people to be considered successful. Most people are somewhere in between those two scales, and that does really make a difference as to the type of content you're making and what the kind of trends are in those directions. Yeah?
So I know with all the gaming and stuff, YouTube has become really big for many gamers, and it was created in 2005 when it was. Do you think that that greatly increased the UK's like gaming industry, or what do you think?
That's a really good question, because yeah, YouTube is huge, and then things like Twitch as well, where people are like live streaming games now. And I don't know if that's changed the UK games industry specifically. It's definitely changed how people are making games though. The big companies now are making games that suit being played through on YouTube or being streamed on Twitch. And your big companies are spending marketing budget getting people who are streaming on Twitch and YouTube to market their games essentially. So yeah, there are very popular British streamers and things like that, but I don't think they exclusively stream British games. It's much more of a global thing now, because kind of anyone can fire up Twitch or YouTube and stream almost any game. But that has had a really big impact on how people are designing and making games, because you want to get your games in front of that audience, because these people have like millions of fans, and that's like, if they're streaming your game, that's like millions of free eyeballs who might not care about an advert on the side of a bus, but they're watching the person on YouTube that they like play your game. So if I say Ninja, does anyone know who that is? Yeah, he's the Fortnite guy. He makes a lot of money just playing Fortnite, which I mentioned earlier. I think he recently got paid like $4 million to stream a new game for like 3 days. So yeah, I'm not going to recommend getting into streaming, because hardly anyone's making that kind of money. But I do feel like I missed the boat. If that had been a thing 10 years ago, I played enough video games for someone to pay me for about $4 million for 3 days of a video game. I would have done that, but slightly before my time. But yeah, that has made a massive difference in how modern video games are being designed. And you'll see that played out over the next 5 or 10 years. Games are going to become much more geared towards a YouTube and Twitch audience, definitely. Cool, I think that's about bang on time, which is very good for me. So yeah, thanks for listening. Hopefully that was interesting, and I'll hand you back.